Eve, what's your role with Future Schools? Tell me a little bit about that, and what are some of the priorities there for those that are not aware?
Yeah, so maybe a bit of a backstory around that so you understand how Future Schools came to be. At the end of doing this wellbeing work that I was describing earlier, I was invited to become part of a cohort at a university that was looking at the future of schooling.
Wow.
And we carried a lens on that. And my lens was particularly around foresight futures and how futures methodologies could support educators to imagine, create, define, and then orientate toward desired futures. So
Mm,
it all sounded like a bit sort of airy fairy, but it was quite an interesting body of work because we were taking some of the futures work that is now becoming more mainstream in education.
it is, yeah.
We're taking it from other sectors, so from um, sectors like the environment, corporate, health, and we were trying to apply the tools to education. And this is sort of 15 years ago or somewhere around there. And of course, that opened up a whole world. And I was thinking, this is amazing. Like, why haven't we been looking at this stuff more closely? Or why don't we look at this more closely? And that led me to then think, well, how can this become more accessible for schools? And I
Fantastic.
was approached by a number of schools and school leaders then to work with their teams around futures and foresight for their own sites. And it led to the creation of Future Schools. And we were really keen on how can we build a network, a collaborative network where people can learn from each other, they can share experience, and hopefully then orientate their schools and contextualize what they learn to their own setting. And so
Mhm.
we didn't go in and say, oh, this is what you must do. It was more a case of, hey, here's some ideas. How about you hook up with schools around the country and around the world and then see what you and your team can do in your context. So that's
Mm,
how Future Schools was born. And we just grew and developed, and we're here 8 years later.
fantastic. So, excuse my ignorance, but what is a futures methodology?
So Futures and Foresight is a strategic methodology, which essentially helps, in our case, schools or other organizations to think about their futures and then to shape and define in accordance with those possible, probable, potential futures that they're
Mhm.
imagining. And so it's a
Interesting.
really quite detailed body of knowledge now, quite well researched, and
Fantastic.
certainly uptake in other sectors is really strong and
Mm.
increasingly becoming mainstream in education.
I was speaking to a futurist called Ben Hammersley a little while ago, and he's based in New York, and this was actually so this was probably 3 years ago, so well before AI and ChatGPT had come onto the scene, and I'm actually due to have a conversation with him again in a couple of weeks. And I said, one of the questions I asked him was, how on earth can we predict the future? How can we prepare for it? And I think that question, given today's context, is even more important. So I guess I'll pose it to you. Like, how on earth do we know what the
Mm.
future is going to look like? And how can we be even begin to have a conversation to be prepared for
Yeah, and I think the short answer is we obviously can't predict.
it? Yeah.
That's a given, but I would
But
contend.
it doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything.
Yeah, of course, and
Yeah.
just what we can do is we can start to look at the histories. We can think about present scenarios and
Yeah.
present circumstances. We can look at trends and trend lines that may well evolve and move in certain directions, and then make informed choices around, as I said earlier, possible, probable futures, and then seek to shape those futures. And
Mhm.
certainly the methodology that I've taken to shaping futures that we imagine is a methodology around cultural evolution. So
Mm.
how cultures from where they are to where we want to be strategically or from a futures or foresight perspective.